Welcome to Femme Furious, a podcast where pop culture meets a feminine framing. I am your host, Julia Rose Portela, and today we are setting a trap at the Turnbow house as we dive deep into episode 3 of season 5 of Stranger Things. But before we dive into today's episode, let me tell you how you can subscribe and follow the podcast. We are no longer on Spotify. That's official as of today. However, we are on every other streaming platform, including YouTube, if you want to watch it on there. If you are looking for a video podcast as well, you will have it on Patreon and on Substack for free, as well as in those two sectors, Patreon and Substack. You will be able to also have a full transcript. So it's going to be a little bit more accessible on there too. So it's available literally everywhere that you could possibly imagine except Spotify at this point. Okay? You can also follow the podcast on Instagram and on TikTok. Please do. Please go follow me on Instagram and on TikTok. I really need to grow my numbers on social media because I have a lot of really cool stuff coming, and a lot of people look to the podcast Instagram first. And so go follow me on TikTok and Instagram, and that is at femmeandfuriouspod. You can send me an email with your thoughts and your opinions. I would love to hear them. I would love to talk about them on the podcast. That's at femmeandfuriouspod@gmail.com. And then, of course, you can join my monthly newsletter. It's called Lipstick and Lore. It's going to cover recaps of everything that we've discussed. It's going to have some fun trivia, games, some backstage, peek behind the curtain information, as well as everything that's coming up on the podcast. So that is what's going on over there. And with all of that said, let's dive into our chic peek. Let's take a chic peek at season 5, episode 3. This is your spoiler warning. We are talking about everything from the Stranger Things universe up until this point. Next week, we will be covering, just ahead of the volume 2 drop, we will be covering episode 4. Then we will be going into the volume 2 drop, which has 3 episodes. So we will cover one of those episodes before the season finale. I am seeing the season/series finale in the movie theater. So I'm going to be talking about my experience, but we won't get that episode until the end of January. We're still going to go episode by episode because we're covering a lot of stuff here. And I want to make sure that everything has its time, its place. But we'll be into the season finale. We'll be past the season finale by the time we talk about it on the podcast. So that will already all be out in the world, but we will still be going episode by episode, okay? So this episode that we are talking about today, season 5, episode 3, it is called The Turnbow Trap, written by Caitlin Schneiderhan, who also wrote one episode in season 4, and that is The Monster and the Superhero. Now, to give you like a tag of what is going on in that episode, one of the most notable, I think, things that I think is happening in that episode is when Elle is confronting Mike about the letters, and she's like, from Mike, from Mike, from Mike. So we know that that's the type of dialogue and emotional stakes that we are getting. And The Monster and the Superhero has like one of my favorite all-time monologues from Dr. Brenner. So there's just a lot going on in this episode. And Caitlin is sort of doing the writing that is leading us through that. Anyway, it is also directed by Frank Darabont, who has done a ton of stuff, including Shawshank and many, many other things, came out of retirement to do this episode, and we'll be doing one more episode this season. That is Shock Jock. I believe that is episode 5, but don't quote me on that because I'm not 100% sure. But he is also going to be directing that episode, Shock Jock. So we will talk about him again and his style again when we get there. The vibe check for this episode is like Scooby Gang meets Into the Woods, if you've ever seen that Broadway musical, meets Home Alone. The feral factor is a 7 out of 10. And who this episode is for, it is for the girls who were labeled paranoid and turned out to be correct. I see you. I love you. It is for anyone who ever in their entire life took the time to set up the game Mousetrap and then played the game Mousetrap after. Okay? This is for you. This episode is for you. It is for former gifted kids who learned survival before adulthood. And that's who this episode is going to really jibe with. Here's my hot girl hot take. Was this episode fun? Absolutely. Did it fundamentally change anything about the story? Not really. The Turnbow Trap is a narrative trampoline, one that we really enjoy in the Stranger Things fandom. This tends to be like a Stranger Things staple, but it's a trampoline, not a landing. We are not landing somewhere. We are not staking a claim in something. We are sort of just moving the plot along in a way that is very fun and digestible. It doesn't really deliver any answers. It doesn't really deliver any consequences so much as it launches us forward with momentum, with tension, and just enough chaos to keep us seated and entertained. The stakes feel high. They're still feeling like they're high, but the gang is locked into their normal rhythm, and the audience is just having a great time watching our characters. Structurally speaking, this episode is about positioning, not about payoff. Let us dive into our femme frame, where we will explore key feminist themes, herstory, cultural context, and more. Now, when I was looking at this episode, I was sort of like, what really is our femme frame here? And I ended up coming up with something that is maybe my favorite thing that we have ever discussed thus far on this podcast, mostly because I like mythology. Okay, so the name of this femme frame is Don't Eat the Food, but Notice Who's Feeding You, Appetite, Other Worlds, and Why Holly Wheeler's Breakfast is a Very Bad Sign. So let's begin with a rule mythology has been whispering, shouting, occasionally screaming at us for literally a millennia, and that is don't eat the food. Not in the underworld, not in fairyland, not in Wonderland, not in Narnia, absolutely not in Hawkins. In a mind palace with a psychic mass murderer who is playing Martha Stewart and handing a child fresh fruit and the ability to make baked goods. Now, I know Holly doesn't know that, but she's got her nose in a book the entire season so far, and it would be nice if we could just use our little noodle to think about these things, because this just happens in all sorts of mythology and all sorts of books. Across mythology, folklore, and fantasy, and pop culture, by the way, eating food in another world is never usually about nourishment. It is about binding that person to the world. Most of the time, it is about possession and a shift in power or a shift in your humanity, especially if you are a human going into these worlds, that you are losing something of your humanity in order to remain in this world, and the food is usually a gateway there. So this is sort of like something that we explore in mythology all of the time. You know, we have things like the original sin, for example, of Eve eating the apple, Adam eating the apple, and like the consequences of that. But it's a little bit different when we were talking about like going into another world or another dimension. So there's plenty of examples of like, don't eat the food. So this is just like a general mythology, but it takes us to another level of depth when we are talking about like interdimensional or portals or other worlds or things like that. The clearest mythological precedent of this specific type of mythos that we are talking about actually comes from Greek mythology, which should not be shocking to anybody, specifically the story of Persephone. So Persephone does not remain in the underworld simply because Hades abducts her. The decisive moment that becomes sort of the legal, binding, cosmic jurification of this experience for her is when she eats the pomegranate seeds while she is still there. Now, in the mythology, eating 6 seeds is the 6 months that we are in fall and winter. And when she returns, it is the 6th month that we are in spring and summer. So there is like an elemental piece to this as well for like the mythology in Greek mythology. But in ancient Greek belief, consuming the food of another realm bound you to that realm. And this is something that Persephone knew before she was abducted into the underworld. This was understood as a metaphysical law, not a metaphor. This is something that was truly hammered home to these gods, to these mortals, not to eat the food in the underworld. And this is really explored in a piece that is called the Homeric hymn to Demeter. So I'll link that in here. Now, I know a lot about Greek mythology because I've studied astrology, and astrology in our modern context is actually Roman mythology, but a lot of people do not know the Roman counterpart. So like the Roman counterpart to Persephone would be Prosperina. But anyway, we tend to have like a lot of overlap in the Roman and Greek mythos. So what matters here in the experience of Persephone is not the fruit, it is the logic behind eating the fruit. Because eating is framed as participation in the underworld, and participation is framed as giving your consent, and consent then becomes the destiny of Persephone to be bound to this world for as many pomegranate seeds as she's eaten for 6 months out of every year. And notice who the logic is applied to. A young woman, the daughter of spring, right? A woman whose appetite becomes the narrative excuse for her captivity. Mythology loves to punish women not for disobedience, but for wanting something while trapped. This again goes into the mythology of Eve. We're not going to dive into that today because it's not considered otherworld, but you can use that comp, right? They're punished. Well, Eve is punished for disobedience, but also for wanting something while she is trapped in the Garden of Eden. So the vibes are already bad. Fairy food is another prime example of this. So the rule doesn't just stay in Greek mythology. It migrates into European folklore, especially into Celtic fairy traditions. And so in these stories, humans are warned repeatedly not to eat fairy food. They are warned not to drink the fairy wine. They are warned not to accept fruit, bread, or sweets from the fae or the fairies. Because once you do, you risk losing your memory, your sense of time, and your ability to return home at all. So there is a really great book called An Encyclopedia of Fairies. It was written in 1976. It is by Catherine Briggs. That's where a lot of this information comes from. But we see a modern version of this in ACOTAR. If you've read that series, which I feel like if you're listening to this podcast, there's like a pretty fair chance that you have. And so think about that, right? Feyre can't drink the fairy wine. That's something that she's like told again and again not to do. And when Rhysand does give it to her, she's like fucked up, like more so than most people. If you've read The Cruel Prince and that series, they really discuss a lot of the mythology of fairy in a much more traditional context. If you've read The Courting of Bristol Keats, they discuss it in there. So like any book that is sort of a modern fantasy that has any sort of connection to fae mythology, which is a lot of books at this point, you will see them often talking about food and like the ability for humans to eat food in fairy, and what is safe food for them to eat and what is not safe food for them to eat in fae. So fairy food is never grotesque. It's actually quite beautiful. It's usually very abundant. It's offered kindly, and it is almost always a trap in these stories. To eat is to accept the hospitality of whoever is offering it to you. And in folklore, hospitality is often considered a contract. Once you accept it, you are subject to that world's rules. So when you are accepting the food of fairy, you are subject to the rules of fairy, which are very different than the rules of our mortal world, Earth. So there is something to that. Again, the pattern holds. The danger is not about violence. The danger is actually in the politeness, in the offering of the thing. And the biggest danger is to say yes. So, in the book, The Courting of Bristol Keats, she actually packs food with her so she can go into fairy because she's not sure when the next time she's going to be able to eat something. So there is a lot around the exploration of like what we can and can't eat in fairyland. Alice in Wonderland turns this trope sideways but keeps the bones intact. So this is more of a modern telling, especially if you've seen the movie. Alice eats and drinks in the other world, meaning Wonderland, constantly. There's actually things that say, drink me, eat me. So if we were following the rules of the mythos and we were ourselves going to Wonderland, I would not be so fooled to have something that says drink me or eat me. I would be much more cautious if I had been Alice. However, she does drink the little potion. She does eat the cake. So she's got cakes. She's got potions, she's got mushroom that she takes, and every time that she consumes something in Wonderland, her physical body does change. She becomes too big, she becomes too small, she becomes over emotional, she can't stop crying. So there is a physical change that does happen to her that we are able to witness both in the book and in the movies, any of the movies. So a lot of literary scholars have actually read this story, Alice in Wonderland, about a girl and the idea of girlhood and bodily control in a world that is obsessed with regulating feminine appetite. So this is from a piece called The Woman and the Demon by Nina Arbach. It was from 1982. I just read a little excerpt from it, but it was wonderful, and it was specifically talking about this. Alice's hunger is not dangerous because she is greedy. It is dangerous because it destabilizes her place in the world, and it forces her to lose her bodily autonomy in Wonderland. The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe does something very similar. Edmund eats the Turkish delight that has been enchanted by the White Witch, and this food, the Turkish delight, makes him crave more. It clouds his judgment. It leads him to betrayal. Crucially, the witch does not force him to eat. She feeds him. So food here becomes manipulation through desire. We've seen this in other fairy tales like Hansel and Gretel, for example, but in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, food becomes manipulation through desire. Edmund isn't evil. He's hungry and he's lonely and he's desperate for comfort. And the story, uses food and eating food in another world. Mythology and fantasy are obsessed with this idea of eating food in another world like Narnia and then losing something critical about ourselves. That leads us to the next part of our path. So, for example, the Turkish delight clouding his judgment, that is a part of the story that is critical. If he had not eaten that food, he would not have had that problem. Fast forward to modern storytelling, and the rule still stands. In Spirited Away, Chihiro's parents eat the food that is designed to be for the spirit world, and they are transformed into pigs. So the consumption of this food that is from another world literally strips them of their humanity, and Chihiro survives because she resists this and tries to eat sparingly. In Coraline, the other mother offers Coraline lavish meals and domestic perfection, but the more that Coraline accepts, the closer she becomes to being trapped for forever. So that's another significant story where we see eating the food in the other world is creating a contract where you are being trapped into that world or trapped into a different existence. So in both stories, Spirited Away and in Coraline, abundance is the danger and leads us to the same conclusion, which is the world that feeds you easily is the world that wants to own you. So there is something about the food of that world connects you to that world. And I just want to keep this in mind because this trope saturates these stories telling, which matters because Stranger Things is remixing this era with intention. So in Labyrinth, Sarah is offered enchanted food that would make her forget her brother and stay for forever. She refuses, and the refusal is the turning point. In Gremlins, eating after midnight transforms creatures into monsters. So food alters identity. In Poltergeist, children are lured by familiarity and comfort before being consumed by the house itself. The 1980s understood something about the mythology of food, and that is that food is a threshold to the portals of this other world in a capacity that keeps you there and keeps you stuck or keeps you transformed or transforms you in some capacity or another. So let's talk about Holly in this story, because here's the detail that already matters. We're sort of in a world experience. It's sort of like Inception. So we have the regular world, Hawkins, Indiana. We have the upside down. That is when they flip and everything is sort of gray. We've got the floating mystery dandruff, as Robin likes to put it. We have all of the vines that are going through. And then we have Henry Krill's mind palace, Vecna's mind palace, whatever you want to call it. And that is a projection of the world through the psychic telekinetic powers that Henry possesses. So Holly, her physical body, Holly Wheeler's physical body has been taken by the Demogorgon and is already hooked up to a spire in the upside down. So she's been taken from Hawkins. She's in the upside down. Her consciousness and her mind are projected into Henry's consciousness, his mind palace. We know that when people are in the upside down and they are taken, we've seen this with Barb, we've seen this with Will, we've seen this in season 3 with Heather and her parents not really with Heather, but when Heather's parents are taken, we've seen this as well. When somebody is being connected to the upside down, there is a vine that goes into their mouth, that suctions around their mouth, and then pumps something into them. We also know that this connection, the thing that is being pumped into them, does create a connection very specifically to the Mind Flayer. We've only ever seen this with the Mind Flayer. So although this season, in season 5, in episode 1, we see that it's Vecna that hooks Will up to this thing, but in season 3, when we have like the meat monster that's on the run, there's the scene with Heather's parents where Billy and Heather are like, try not to move too much, and then we see the meat monster shaped as the Mind Flayer come out of the shadows, and we see the vines from the Mind Flayer hook into Heather's parents, and we see that they're being pumped with the stuff. So Holly's physical body is hooked up to a spire in the Upside Down with the vine already attached to her mouth. So there is already a contract between Holly and the Upside Down, probably very specifically to the Mind Flayer, because something is being pumped into her body at this point. She is ingesting the other world. It's not necessarily food, but she is ingesting stuff from the other world, whether she consents to it or not. We know that something is going into their body because we also know that they pulled this vine out of Will in season 1. And we also know that in season 1, at the very end of the season, Will throws up the demo slug. So there is something physically in his body that could be thrown up to exist, inside of them, that is already existing inside of them. So this is important because she is already consenting to this particular world. But there is something about Vecna's Mind Palace, which is obviously a separate realm of existence, or at least we're supposed to be looking at it that way, because it's not the Upside Down. It is somewhere completely alternate. So that's important because it means that she is making a contract twice over. One with consent, because she is accepting the food and ingesting the food, that is the blackberries. And then the cake, she is baking a cake and then eats this big chunk of cake. But we also know that she is already being ingested with something. So that is Persephone twice over. In mythology, eating the food seals the bond, but also preparing the food, which she does with the cake. She makes the cake, she bakes the cake, she ices the cake, and then she eats the cake. That is an initiation into something. It is an internalization of whatever the world is preparing her for. So whether that is her ingesting Henry's lies, whether is whatever the world is teaching her in its own rhythms, but it is making her complicit in the binding of this experience. So anthropologically, shared food is how communities are formed. Ritual meals mark transitions and allegiances, but Holly isn't just consuming the food in Vecna's Mind Palace. She's literally made a home there. She's baking, she's in the kitchen, she's learning how to live in this experience inside Vecna's mind. So that is foreshadowing us for something. Mythology tells us that once food enters the story, escape becomes incredibly complicated. Persephone can leave the underworld, but she is never fully free. She must return. She must return. Part of her belongs in the underworld because she has eaten this food. And in Stranger Things, if they follow this mythic logically, Holly's arc is not going to just be about possession. It's going to be about a permanent connection similar to Will. It is about a child who may cross worlds with ease because she has already accepted its hospitality, so to speak. Across thousands of years of storytelling, eating in another world is never, ever neutral. This is something that I learned too. So in doing spiritual work, when I would go into shamanic journeys, which I've done quite a few of them over the course of my lifetime, when you go into a shamanic journey, one of the things that I was told, only after I had done it, by the way, I had gone into a shamanic journey and I had somebody offer me an apple and I ate the apple. I just took a bite of it and I came out and I was telling my mentor that, and she was like, I had basically more faith in you because you read a lot of mythology and you understand a lot of mythology. And she's like, yeah, don't eat the food in a shamanic journey ever. So I think about that now when I go into shamanic journeys because I've been offered food other times that I've been in shamanic journeys. And so you don't know where your consciousness is traveling. I know we like to look at like ourselves as just as earth, but when you astral project in a spiritual context, when your soul leaves its body in any capacity, whether that is in dreams or whether that is in daydreams or whether that is like through intentional astral projecting, like in a shamanic journey, you may be traveling somewhere else and you once again should not eat the food there. So when Stranger Things lingers then on this idea of the blackberries, the cakes, the breakfast rituals, tomorrow we're going to have pancakes, right? Chocolate chip pancakes, because that's Derek's favorite. It is speaking a mythic language that is older than just this season of television, because this is an ancient warning. Its symbolism, I think, is very intentional here. And the lesson, I think, is going to be brutal. So to one Holly Wheeler, don't eat the food. You already have, but we are hoping that this will go good for you, because once you do, the story decides who you belong to. And historically, that decision has never been kind to girls. So there's that. I'm a little nervous for our girl Holly Wheeler. Just slightly nervous, okay? All right, let's dive into our slay by slay of this episode. We will go beat by beat. I have some really cool stuff to talk about in this episode and next episode. And I'm not going to lie to you guys. Some of the stuff that I researched for these 2 episodes of television, I did a lot of screenshots, pausing, looking. Like, there was just a lot going on in these last 2 episodes for me as far as like theorizing or like making connections and things like that. So let us talk about this episode of television, the Turnbow Trap. It starts with Hop and Elle in the upside down. They are trying to get through the wall. They're stabbing it. Elle is like trying to use her powers on it, and it's not working. There is no avail here. There is nothing that is moving, wiggling, shaking, changing, no opening. Everything, every time they get like even a little bit open, it like sort of sews itself shut. So there is that. So we know that the wall is like sort of protected or seemingly impenetrable at some point or to some capacity. We also know that whatever is behind this wall, which is, we will talk about that as the episode goes. We also know that what's behind this wall, which we are presuming is where the kids are and Vecna is also where Elle cannot see in her psychic mind. So she can't use her powers beyond this wall. We can't see what's going on in this wall. It is protected from her powers as well. We also then see like the cops pull up, the sort of Popo, the Hawkins police, the Hawkins lab. I don't really know who we're going to call them, but so we see them pull up. We see a new device. It is a sonic device. It is clearly using sound frequency, that is where I'm saying sonic from, to debilitate Elle. Elle ends up calling it her kryptonite. So we are using the Superman terminology for this, but we know that they've done this before to these children, because we know in season 4 they were wearing those collars that they had on in the lab with Dr. Brenner. And we also know that Henry had the Soteria pill. It's not really a pill, but it looked like a little pill. Like the Soteria tracker was in his neck. And we know that debilitated his powers completely and made it impossible for him to use his powers completely. And we also know that it was a tracking device so that they would be able to see where he was at all times. But we do know that the collars that the kids wear in season 4 like lessened their powers to some capacity. And so now we have this new device that is a sonic sound frequency, and that specific frequency clearly debilitates them and makes it nearly impossible, physically impossible for Elle to use her powers, as well as makes it much harder for her to seemingly even think or process. Like, she's in a lot of pain. So at least we know with the collars, they weren't putting them in pain. I don't remember if they were shock collars or not, but they weren't at least in pain. They were just collared, which still sucks, but at least, they could move around and stuff. And then it cuts to Robin, Will, and Joyce. So we get all of them in the car. Joyce finds Robin and Will after their little excursion from last episode. So here's the thing. Joyce gets like a little snarky with Robin, and I have a problem with Joyce as a mother who is willing to risk everyone else's life, including Elle, who she fostered, who was her foster daughter, and Jonathan, her firstborn son, but not Will. And I know where this fear or this like sensitivity around Will is coming in, but she literally was Elle's mother and like is like, well, she's fine. She's ready. Let her go. And that feels really challenging to me. And especially like this idea of like, she's willing to let Robin risk her life. She's willing to let Mike and Dustin and Lucas risk their lives, but she's not willing to let, I understand that she's upset with Robin, but honestly, literally everyone in this show has risked their life for Will multiple times at this point. So calling her inconsiderate feels a little gross. But then we finally have Will standing up to Joyce. He is advocating for himself. And this is important for his character growth because Will tends to take sort of a backseat in a lot of the stuff, especially like even with the confrontation that, you know, Dustin has earlier with the bullies in school. You know, Will is there, but he doesn't say anything. He's not like trying to be a menacing threat. He's just standing next to Mike and supporting Mike as Mike is like, yeah, don't let these inbreds like continue bullying our friend. That's not what he says, but he says something like, don't let this kid keep breathing. So I think it's important. I think seeing Will stand up for himself and seeing Will acknowledge that this is the time to take risks. Like, Mom, this is not the time to play it safe. We need to be going out there. And guess what? I was right. What I discovered was correct. What I figured out was leading us into allowing us to open a new door and a new plan and a new path of possibility. I was really proud to see Will stand up for himself in this capacity. We then flash to the school. There's another shot of rainbows on the wall. Okay. It's sort of like one big rainbow on the wall. And it's not the focus of the shot. It's sort of on the side of the shot as we're like panning down the hallway. And then we go into the classroom. We see dipshit Derek with his rainbow shirt. And then, you know, we sort of go around his shoulder, like the camera sort of pans around his shoulder. And we see him turn around and look at Mr. What's-It and like wave at him over his shoulder. So a lot about rainbows, like, you know, Holly Wheeler being in this rainbow outfit, Derek being in this rainbow outfit, you know, having in season 2 the shot of the rainbow with Callie and Elle in it when we were in Terry Ives and her mind palace and seeing her stuff about Elle and when Elle was a baby. We also know that the name of the room was the Rainbow Room that the kids were in when everything, you know, goes sideways with Henry and Elle. So rainbows seem to be an important part of like giving us a visual representation of students, children with powers, children with the ability to have powers, children with empathetic understanding. I'm not really sure because we've not seen Holly or Derek display powers, but is that simply because they don't know that they would be able to? I'm not sure. So there is some sort of visual representation, though, of like children who are connected to the Nina Project. If we're still calling it the Nina Project, I don't know if they are or they are not, but no, that are connected to the Nina Project and what that would mean. Then it goes, this is where I got the idea for the fem frame for today, because I literally was like, did anyone ever tell Holly Wheeler to never motherfucking eat shit from strangers? At least that. Like, have you never been told to eat something from strangers? And I don't understand because she saw her parents get slashed up and then she's like, Henry, are they coming? And Henry's like, yeah, sure. Like after we get all the kids, aren't the kids more important? And I would be like, not when I just saw my parents get slashed up by a fucking demogorgon or whatever the hell that thing was. She's like not traumatized at all and just moves on her merry way. And then she eats the blackberries. And by the way, like the way that Henry says it, he's like, blackberries, they're your favorite, right? And she's like, how did you know? I would be like, me and Holly are different because I'd be like, my guy, how did you know that? That I've never told you that information. Are you rooting around in my head? I would have been class 1 concerned, even when I was a child. I'd be like, how did you know that? That's a little weird. So anyway, Holly Wheeler, everybody. Henry warns Holly not to go into the woods. He says, you are welcome to anything in the house. Everything in the house is yours. Everything in the house is like what's mine is yours, he basically says. And then he leaves her to her own devices. So we don't really know where he's going or what he's doing at that point, but we know that he's leaving that part of his mind palace. He's no longer occupying that part of his mind palace. And I am curious about why Henry did give her music. So I've seen people say that Henry is a version of Vecna that has been left untainted, but I don't think that's true, mostly because of the face that Jamie is making as Henry when we see him shut the door at the end of last episode. It's a very, very menacing, very dark, disturbing kind of look. So this is what I was wondering, and you guys can let me know what you think of this. I wonder if he's using Max and his experience with Max, who was able to break out of his curse because of music. Maybe he did not know music could do this. Who knows? We don't know what he knows or what he doesn't know. How many people has he clearly trapped in his mind palace that he's like, they all live up here and no one's broken out before? So was Max the first example of somebody breaking out of his curse because they were able to discover the music? We know that we know that Victor Creel was brought back from the curse as well through the Ella Fitzgerald song, Dream a Little Dream of Me. However, he still, ends up pretty fucked up in that situation. So I wonder if Henry did not know that that's what brought him out of the curse and discovers that through his experience with Max, and then uses that information to now offer the children, particularly this experience with one Holly Wheeler, the music to test a theory about what is going to be possible since he physically has her body. We know, well, I guess according to Lucas, we don't know that it was Vecna, right? However, we do know that Holly's physical body is missing from the real world. We know that her physical body is in the Upside Down somewhere, that it was taken by the Demogorgon, and we know that her consciousness is in Vecna's mind palace. So I wonder if because he has control of the physical body, whereas like he did not have control of Max's physical body, he didn't have access to it in the real world in Hawkins, he just had access to her mind. So if she's able to break out of the curse and in control of her physical body, that's one thing. But I wonder if because he has control of their physical body, if he can use music to see whether or not they would wake up, because even if they woke up, they're still in the Upside Down and he still has control over them. So I am curious if this is like he's trying to test a theory about something or proving the point that if he already has their physical body and they're already vined up in their mouth, if they've already got the mouth ingesting them with all of this stuff, pumping them full of stuff, if that means that music would have no ability to break them out of the curse because they're already physically being controlled by him. That's my theory. I don't think I've seen anyone say that on the internet, but that's what I think is happening, and that's why I think he gives her the music, and I think we are supposed to be curious about this, right? So Holly then watches Henry leave. He's now just given her this sort of like cryptic warning about not going into the woods. And then Holly clutches at her necklace, which has Holly the Heroic on it, the figure that Mike gave her last episode. And I think this is really important because it shows us that she has taken what Mike has said to heart and it has reached her in a certain capacity. She's starting to feel afraid. So she takes her Holly the Heroic, right? She doesn't need Mr. What's-It. She needs Holly the Heroic. So I think that's an important film shot that we get in that particular moment. And then it goes back to the Upside Down. So in the Upside Down, we see Elle completely incapacitated, trying to stay quiet while Alpha One, aka Acres, checks the area. And that's where he ends up going to pee on this wall. And when he's peeing, he sees the knife that Hopper was using to try to break through this wall to get to the other side. Now, they know that somebody is here. Here's what I will say. They are calling this device Hedgehog. I was trying to do some research on why they would call this device Hedgehog, and the only thing that I could come up with is that because it is a sonic weapon, they named it like for Sonic the Hedgehog. Though this doesn't really make sense as far as the 80s go because Sonic came out in the 90s. So I'm not sure if that was just a snafu or like a little wink and nod for us. I'm trying to figure out why they would call it Hedgehog. And so like the only thing that I could come up with is it's a sonic device that is using sound frequencies to debilitate her. So Sonic the Hedgehog. If anyone else understands why they are calling it Hedgehog, because that feels so specific, I would love to hear it. I would love to hear your theories on this. So and Hop are behind a fallen sign of the Turbos. Here's what the sign says. It says new residential subdivision, development and realty coming soon, 1 acre lots. And it's mom, dad, and Derek, but no Tina, which I thought was really, really interesting. And I'm going to post a picture of this because it's very Back to the Future-esque. So when Marty goes back to the future, or when he goes back into the past and he's in the 1950s, he hides the DeLorean behind the Leon estates. And so it has the same family. It's got like a dad with dark hair. It's got a blonde mom and 2 blonde kids, a boy and a girl. So it's a similar, like, it's definitely supposed to at least be a wink and a nod to Back to the Future. But in season 4 of Stranger Things, Elle notices a billboard that says scenic route ahead, next right. It's a AAA billboard, but it has the same family of 4 overlooking the Grand Canyon, which I think is really interesting because we get that visual of the Grand Canyon or like a canyon-esque, vibe later in this episode. We will see that in moments to come, but I just think it's important to like have these different spaces of looking at these different billboards. I definitely think this one of the Turnbow estate is supposed to be like the Leon estates, and what that means. So I don't know, but I did like think about the billboard that she pays attention to too and what that means. Here's what annoys me about the Upside Down at this point. Last year when Nancy, Robin, Eddie, and Steve go into the Upside Down through the lake portal, the lake gate, they literally were stepping over vines because they're like, everything here is a hive mind. So if you step on this vine, you're stepping on Vecna. That's like one of the lines that they say. Meanwhile, this year, they are literally throwing grenades. They're just throwing grenades in the Upside Down. Like they're breathing it in, which is fucking annoying to me because like, why make it a rule for so many seasons that they can't breathe this stuff in only for them to say, well, just kidding. At least this is what I'm thinking. Just kidding. We don't want our actors to be masked all season. So we're just going to, retcon that out. And, for all these seasons, you can't step on anything because it's going to alert Vecna where you are, or the Mind Flayer where you are. But this season, we're going to take double grenades and throw them into the Upside Down as if that's not going to have some sort of impact, especially because like grenades burn stuff. Like there's stuff on fire that we see, like even gunfire, like all of this stuff, like the Mind Flayer likes it cold. So I'm concerned, right? I also feel like Elle might be in like short sleeves. I have to like look at this again, but I feel like Elle might be in short sleeves, to which I'm like, aren't you cold? The Upside Down is supposed to be cold. And I'm like concerned that we're doing stuff for like the bigness of it without maintaining the mythology of it. So is Hopper throwing 2 grenades really cool? Yeah, sure. But I don't really understand how that works with like all of the vines that are there. And that really annoys me. All right, then we head back to the Skok, where Dustin, Steve, Jonathan, Nancy, Mike, and Lucas all reunite. We have sort of like a upside down reuniting of the Scooby Gang. Dustin lies and tells his friends that he got into a bike crash. And even though this is what he told Steve, Steve and him have had a conversation that sort of breaks the fourth wall of that lie, where Steve is like, yeah, this was like Andy and his goons, right? So Steve witnesses that he lies to his friends, that Dustin lies to his friends, and he makes a face at it. And I think this is one of the most interesting things. Like I kind of rewound it a couple times to look at it. Like he can believe that Dustin would lie to him, but almost like he cannot believe that Dustin would lie to them. And so categorizing, number one, the value that he thinks he has in Dustin's life, even though him and Dustin are very close friends, almost like that he believes just in this one facial expression that like there's a separation between Steve as a category of friend for Dustin versus like Mike and Lucas. But I actually think that they are all together. I think that they are all significant people to him. And I think it just goes to show that Dustin, who is so like, it's the rule of law. It is the way that the party operates. This is how we are supposed to be navigating these things. Dustin, who has been like the keeper of the mythology of the group, I think is to see Steve like make a face like, oh, he's not just lying to me. He's also lying to them, and maybe acknowledging like how deep this pain runs for Dustin in that moment. I'm not really sure what's going through Steve's mind, but if you watch the scene and you see the face that he makes, I think the face is really, really, really interesting as far as like his response to Dustin's lie, even though he knows that Dustin is lying about this thing. They've already sort of broken the fourth wall on this lie together in the van. So we get our first big like group findings debrief, and we love this in Stranger Things. This is something that really, 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 really works in Stranger Things because it's the 80s and we only have the walkie-talkies to keep us connected. We love when our different groups who are getting different parts of the mystery come together and like explore their findings and come up with a plan. I think Stranger Things does this really well. It's done it every single season. And that's why I say that this episode is more of the trampoline, not the landing. It is like propelling us into the next part of the story. But we love this in Stranger Things. We love when the group comes together. We love when they debrief. So Steve asks, when Will is starting to describe what is happening when he is able to see through the eyes of Vecna/Derek, Steve asks like a really good question, which is like, are you seeing through the eyes of Derek or are you seeing through the eyes of Vecna? And Will answers both. He says, I was Vecna, but I was Vecna inside Derek's mind already. So he was really accessing Vecna's mind, but Vecna was at that moment stalking Derek and inside Derek's mind and looking through Derek's eyes. So we get this comment, but not before Dustin gets in a snide remark about Steve not understanding what's going on. Nancy then also acknowledges that this is different than how Vecna stalked Max and Chrissy, which is true. And I think it's really great that Nancy brings that up here. So Nancy shares that the stalking is the same, right? He stalked his prey both times, but that he didn't appear to Holly as Vecna. He appeared to Holly as Henry. So Joyce is literally right there while they are having this conversation. So first and foremost, this is important because like, why? What is the difference? Is it because the gate is now open? Whereas like before he could only maybe be Vecna because he was trying to open this hellmouth and now he's opened the hellmouth. And so now that it's open, like the rules of participation in like mind breaking are a little bit different. I'm not really sure, but I'm hoping that we get answers on this. Mike then suggests that in appearing to Holly as Henry, that he is trying to gain her trust. But why is that important? Why is it important that he has their trust? Because their physical bodies, as far as we are concerned, are already spired up in the upside down. So why does he need to gain their trust? What would be the value of that? I don't have the answers to that. I just want to keep that stuff in mind. But it is nice to see Mike in a leadership position again. It is nice to see Mike kind of stepping back in as the heart of the party, which, you know, they talk about this in season 4 when Will is like, you are the heart of this party. I really think that it is so important that Mike steps back into this role. And I think the writing and the acting have done an incredible job of putting Mike right there as the heart of the show, because that is really how he was. He is the most likable character, I think, in season 1. I think him and Dustin are like easily like the top, like we love these characters right away. And I think even in season 2, Mike has a lot of that in there, especially in like how he supports Will. And then in season 3 and season 4, it sort of just like tapers off and his character is flat and going through like a little bit of an identity crisis, like a writing crisis. Like I'm not really sure where it falls flat, but Mike in season 3 and season 4 is just like a teenage boy, which isn't a problem except for the fact that these boys have always displayed a high level of empathy. And it just felt like he was missing this. And to see him back in this role, like it really warms my heart. Then we get Jonathan asking Joyce, Mom, you're okay with just kidnapping a child? To which Joyce responds, no, we're saving a child via kidnapping, which I thought is really funny. But also, again, like, this lady is totally fine putting everyone else at risk except for Will, including this young boy who she's willing to kidnap, which is a felony. She would go to jail for this, except that she thinks that she's going to be saving him. So it's like morally gray area. Like, we're walking in this morally gray area with Joyce right now. Dustin, our bard once more, comes through with all of the plot holes in this plan, which is usually what he does. Usually Dustin is the one to deliver us the plan and like, this is what's happening and this is the semantics. And he's the one to kind of explain it to us, the audience. So Mike then pulls out all of the D&D characters and proposes his plan. So here's Mike's plan. They need someone to get close to the Turnbow family. They need someone to get close to Derek because they know that Derek is going to be Vecna's next victim. So they need someone to get close to Derek and his family to knock the family out safely, medically, etc. That's part one. Then part two, they need to extract the family with blindfolds so they don't know where they're going and they don't know where they are if they wake up, so that Vecna cannot track them in his mind, because we know that they've done this before in season 2 with the Mind Flayer. That's part 2. Number 3 is once they are knocked out, they know that Vecna will then send the Demogorgon to extract Derek. So they will prepare traps that they get from Murray to burn the demo, to harm the Demogorgon, to force it to flip back into the upside down. Literally what they say is to send it scampering home to its master, but not before we stick them with one of these. And they pull out the tracker that they use to track Hopper in the upside down. And they will shoot the Demogorgon with the tracker and then track it into the upside down using the van. So the same methodology that we saw during the crawls. Dustin sees no holes with this plan. So if Dustin says it's good, it's good. Great. So it goes back to the Creel house. We see Holly dancing to I Think We're Alone Now by Tiffany. And I feel like this is maybe supposed to be a nod to the Umbrella Academy. I'm not sure if that's just like a creator's choice to say like they liked that, or if it's a choice because of Netflix. I'm not really sure, but I just feel like what are the chances that like 2 really big Netflix properties would have a dance scene through a big house to this song? They could have picked any song. So I feel like that's maybe supposed to be a nod to the Umbrella Academy, but I'm not 100% sure, and I've not seen that confirmed or denied anywhere online. Holly is trying on and wearing all of Alice Creel's clothes. So she is going through Henry Creel's sister, Alice Creel's clothes, which is just a bit haunting and a bit chilling because she kind of looks like her, because we know that Alice Creel was blonde with the pigtails, as we've seen in the flashback. So a little chilling, if we're being honest. She lands on an outfit that has sort of an Alice in Wonderland vibe or like a Dorothy vibe, but she's also, and I think this is the key thing that I have not really seen anyone talking about online, she is dressing like Holly the Heroic. She's dressing like the little figurine that Mike gave her. She's dressing like the Holly figure. And so we're seeing her. She's not all the way there yet, but this dress mimics the blue dress of the Holly figurine. We are seeing Holly transform into Holly the Heroic. That is what we are witnessing in real time. I'm not saying there's not echoes of Dorothy or of Alice in Wonderland, because there is certainly like a young girl, like stranger in a strange land type of vibes. But I think that we're supposed to be thinking more about Holly the Heroic as we're watching this. And then we see that someone is like frantically ringing the doorbell over and over and over and over and over again. She thinks it's Derek. It's not Derek. And there's no one there when she opens the door, but she does see that there is a mail flag up. So she goes to the mailbox and she sees a map from Henry that is telling her to go into the woods because he needs help. And so that is what Holly is now preparing for. We flip back to the upside down, where there are now helicopters in the upside down. I don't even know gravity-wise how that works. Why? Why is the upside down a war zone? Why is the upside down being militarized in this capacity? How is that even possible? I just don't understand, and it really annoys me. In seasons past, like if you think about season 1, they had to be hooked up to wires to go into the upside down so they could tug the wires and be reeled back in. And now there's helicopters, like willy-nilly. I don't understand. Anyway, I have a problem with the helicopters in the Upside Down. I have a problem with them breathing in the Upside Down. I have a problem with grenades that are just like hitting these vines, no big deal, in the Upside Down. Hopper and Elle have now taken Ackers hostage, and they plan to interrogate him. We then get a nice return of Mr. Clark, who we have not seen in a full season. He was not in season 4. So it is nice to see him have returned. We get this explanation from him that Einstein-Rosen bridges, or more commonly known as wormholes. So here's what I got from this picture. I paused it and I was reading the blackboard. I was reading kind of like everything that was in there. So first and foremost, it's an hourglass shape. So it kind of tapers at the middle and then expands out, and it's got a more expanded base. So it's got this kind of hourglass shape to it that he's drawn on the walls. So first of all, the shape I think is critical to acknowledge, because an hourglass shape, 12 children. Why does this wizard have an obsession with clocks? So says Steve, right? In season 4. I feel like we are getting a nod, a wink, a push, like a really strong, hey, time travel is going to be a part of this, especially even in the shape of the wormhole. The entire wormhole is like one big cylinder, so it has a shape that is round. In the diagram that Mr. Clark has drawn, on the right side of the wormhole is the Eisen-Rosen bridge throat. That's what he calls it, the throat of it. So I'm thinking that's the long part of the, like where the shape would taper in the middle. And then on the top where the cylinder is, we are getting there's like an arrow that says in falling matter. So that's where the falling matter goes into, in the middle of the wormhole. And then on the left, we see sort of like from the top of the wormhole through the bottom of the wormhole, this like one circle on the side, and that is where he says it is a normal route or a closed time-like curve. So that is on the left side. And so the test on this is on November 6th, just a few days away, 2 days away at this point. Now, let's talk about Mr. Clark. Let's talk about this scene. On one hand, Mr. Clark being under-enthusiastic that no one is interested in the class is a little bit valid. But on the other hand, he has a very eager Erica Sinclair raising her hand, and it's almost like he doesn't want to call on her. And it's almost like he's defeated calling on her. He's like, okay, Erica. And that's like really bums me out, because in seasons prior, we've seen him so enthusiastic about the boys and their love for this material. And I don't know, I just wanted him to be more excited, like, yeah, Erica, like, tell me about it. But he's more like, of course Erica knows the answer. Of course she's going to raise her hand. Meanwhile, she's the sibling and sitting in the same seat as, Lucas, who was also an eager science student. So I just wish that he was a little bit more enthusiastic about Erica's willingness to participate. So Erica says, wormholes are neat because they allow matter to travel between galaxies or dimensions without crossing the space between. That obviously is going to be important for us. And Mr. Clark says, that's exactly right. Again, just think of all the places mankind could go. Another galaxy, another time even. And at this point, when he says another time, that is when Erica clocks Mike and Lucas trying to get her attention from the window. Then he continues on, so why aren't we doing it now? If wormholes did exist, they would be extraordinarily unstable. Their enormous gravitational force would rip them apart at the very moment they formed. So we're getting some critical information about whatever is going to be happening with Mr. Clark here. So here's my question. If Elle has the power to open a dimension door, is she creating a wormhole? Is that why the Upside Down is stuck in time? So I don't know. Again, I don't have any answers, but I'm hoping that this is something that obviously will get answered. Erica then leaves. She says she's going to the bathroom, and she allows Mike and Lucas 60 seconds, which I have seen now on TikTok, and I'm sure you may have seen this video too. That is the 60 seconds that she gives the boys actually 60 seconds. And yes, it actually is. So Erica tells us that she's no longer friends with Tina. We hear about Erica's relationship with Tina, her best friend, in season 3. when she's with Dustin. She's like, Tina always covers for me, but if I'm not home for so-and-so's party tomorrow, my mother's going to kill you. So we know that Erica and Tina are friends. We learn in this little 60-second dialogue that they are no longer friends. And Tina is Derek's brother. So Erica would be our in to the Turnbow house. And the way that they get Erica to agree, because now Tina and Erica are arch enemies, the way that they get Erica to agree is by saying that after this, Tina will never want to talk to you again. And Erica's like, why didn't you just start with that? So she gets 60 seconds. She goes back to her favorite class. And then we, the audience, go to the hospital where Robin and Will are breaking in to visit Mrs. Massey, who is Robin's cover to visit Vicky and who has broken every bone in her body. She's a frail old woman who has undergone major injuries, and so she really does go to visit her, and she even says, I think she likes me more than her own family at this point. But we also know that she has according to Robin, Mondo stash of benzos. So I love this scene. I love this sequence. I hate that Robin is like dodging Vicky, and I just wish that she would tell Vicky about what's going on. I mean, it seems like Vicky is going to organically be pulled into the fold, so I wish that they would just pull her in sooner. It seems like that would make sense, but I think probably in volume 2, we'll see her get pulled into the mix in some capacity. So Will and Robin bond over the kiss, and Will starts to ask Robin, his gay guru, how he knew that Vicky wanted to date her. And I think this is really interesting. It is confirming that he did see them kiss, that he's going to keep their secret, but he's also pressing her for information like, how do you know? And I just thought that scene was really great as Robin now starts to take Will under his wing. So we then have the demo prep. We are back at the outside of the Squawk, where Murray rolls up. He calls Dustin Bilbo Baggins, which I think is really interesting. So Bilbo Baggins is, in my very limited token knowledge, I'm starting my token scholarship in 2026. So I won't be covering it on this podcast because unfortunately it's not a feminist heavy book or text, but I am familiar with the movies. I am familiar with the story. I've never read it, and so I can't go too deep into like who is Bilbo Baggins, except for that I have read The Hobbit, but I have not read it since middle school. So I have like very limited details. I read about 100 books a year, if not more. I have like a very limited details like of what sticks in my mind, but Bilbo Baggins is the Hobbit, the original Hobbit that we follow in the story of The Hobbit. So that is sort of the prequel to Lord of the Rings, though an interconnected story. And obviously Bilbo Baggins goes on a journey and, is a main character. So I was like trying to find out more information and like refresh my memory on it, but I was having a really hard time and I don't have enough time to reread the book just to understand one little line of dialogue. I think it's interesting, calling Dustin, Hopper calling Dustin Inspector Gadget a couple episodes ago makes a lot of sense to me. We get a lot of, references to Lord of the Rings in these stories. We have Mirkwood. We get like Eddie the Banished, right? Because it's a token, quote. So I just think that there's maybe something to why Dustin is referred to as Bilbo Baggins. And if you're somebody who has thoughts, feelings, and opinions about this, please do send me an email to femmeandfuriouspod@gmail.com because I would really love to discuss it with you guys. Dustin continues to absolutely belittle Steve. And meanwhile, what Steve is doing is smart. He knows that the van is not going to be fast enough if they have all of this equipment in it. So he is trying to like throw the equipment out of the van. And then Dustin just fucks up Steve's car, which I think is so twisted and so unfair. But as he's doing this, the song that is playing is the same song that plays in Ferris Bueller's Day Off when they're doing the stuff with the car. So that is like the boom, boom. You're welcome for that. That's the entire song, by the way. I know there's a name for it, and I know that I do have it on like my Apple Music somewhere, but I don't know it off the top of my head. Anyway, that song plays, so that's from like Ferris Bueller's Day Off, where they're like tweaking the car and doing stuff with the car. And now he's tweaking the car and doing stuff with the car, so I thought that was cute and fun. But we also then have Nancy schooling Murray when Murray is like, you can't put one of these trackers in a bullet. Like, it looks like that's what you're doing. And she's like, is that a fact or is that a theory? And I absolutely adore that. It then goes to like Murray, Nancy, and Jonathan going out to test this theory on whether or not the tracker would survive being shot through the gun. And I'm not really sure what our takeaway about the scene is supposed to be, but I think that it's definitely that Nancy can hear them talking. So obviously they're discussing here the fact that Nancy is cranky and Jonathan is like, well, obviously she's cranky. Her parents are like incapacitated in the hospital and her sister is missing. And, so Murray then goes in and he's like, well, don't you think proposing to her would like ease her mood a little bit? And like, you said you were going to do it. I thought you guys were having problems, like all of this stuff. So they're having this entire conversation. It's kind of like hush, hush. But my thoughts on this are that Nancy can definitely hear them, which is why she threatens to shoot him in the balls. So she threatens Murray. She's like, I don't ever miss. So how about you just shut the fuck up? The fact that Murray like acknowledges that things in their relationship between Jonathan and Nancy are stagnating and that's why Jonathan should propose, to me is like the exact reason why he shouldn't. I'm like, nope. An engagement isn't going to fix stagnation, baby. So, especially since Jonathan tells Nancy in season 1 that like her mom married rich and married older, and then settled down and she didn't want to be like her mom. Like this was so part of the foundation of their connection. And now it seems like a repeating of the story almost if she did that. Hopper in the Upside Down is interrogating Akers, who tells Hopper that he saw Elle take down the helicopter in season 4. And he says, some of my buddies were in that helicopter. They died. She's a freak. And then he's like, go to hell. And Hopper goes, I'm already here, look around, because they're in the Upside Down. I love that line. We then have the acknowledgement that the base in the Upside Down is on Gable Ridge Road. So here's what I'd love to know. Elle is rooting around in Akers' mind, right? How do these mind memories work? Because it sort of reminds me of Ready Player One. And, we've seen things like this before. We've seen this in like Harry Potter with the pensieve. But when the memory is over, the pensieve sort of dissolves or like fades into another memory. Here, we see Akers, whose memory Elle is in. We see Akers leave the room, but Elle is still in the memory and in fact goes in a different direction than Akers goes. So I'm confused how these mind memories work. Like, I'm not sure how she would be able to follow Dr. K in a memory when Akers has left the building. But in Ready Player One, it's a virtual reality, which makes sense. And the virtual reality will have like, because it's a video game type of deal, it's like it resets after a certain amount of time or after a certain experience or something has happened to like trigger the reset. So I'm not really sure how these mind memories work, but I hope that they kind of explain it to us. Also, now people can feel Elle in their minds. And I don't know if it's painful for Akers only because he's trying to resist it. But we have seen Elle just sort of walk into someone's mind before. She did it with Max. She did it with Billy. She did it with Vecna. But in those experiences, we did not see any of the people in pain because she was there. We have seen people acknowledge her when she's in that space or acknowledge the memories that she's looking through, but we haven't necessarily seen them be in pain over it. So I don't know if it was painful for him only because he was trying to resist her. In seasons prior, in seasons 3 and 4, we've not seen Billy or Max be alerted to the fact that she was there, except for Billy, who was also connected to the Mind Flayer at that point, and then Max, who was under Vecna's curse at that point. So I don't know if he can actually physically feel her or if he's just trying to resist her. I'm not sure, but I was like curious about what was going on there. We then see Elle say that there's kryptonite behind this door that Dr. K is going to. So there's someone powerful, someone like me. That's what Elle says. And this is leading her to think that it's Vecna, that they have Vecna behind that door. We then switch back to the Creel house. We get a better look at her Holly the heroic figure. And that to me is 100% who I think that she is getting dressed as. The Holly the heroic figure is wearing like a golden sort of cloak. She's got something in her hand. So we see Holly get ready to go into the woods. She puts on a golden cloak. She takes the red kerchief. She puts that around her neck. And then she's like looking for like, what is the thing that Holly the heroic is holding in her hands? I'm not really sure. So she takes a fire poker and brings that with her, which like fire pokers are pretty heavy. I was like pretty impressed with like baby Holly picking that up. She asks her Holly the heroic figure, like, what would you do? And then this is what Mike told her, like, you don't need to rely on these other people. You need to think about like Holly the heroic and what she would do. What's her choice? What decisions would she make? And that's when she then picks up the fire poker. She grabs the cloak and she sets off into the woods and she decides to go on this journey. It then transfers us back to the Turnbow house where we see Erica, who is fucking crazy with her acting skills, with the tears streaming down her face. She's apologizing to Tina. I'm so sorry. And this is her way of getting into the house. We see the dad starting to be influenced by the pie. So the pie is laced with a bunch of benzos. They are knocking the family out. And Derek is like, holy shit, dad's wasted again, which I thought was really funny. We find out that the argument between Erica and Tina was about Erica giving Tina's crush, Josh, a black eye during dodgeball. And now he's humiliated and won't talk to Tina. And Tina is like, he won't talk to me because he associates me and you together. And you're just jealous. And she's like, why do you want me to eat this pie? You want me to eat this pie because you want me to be fat so that you can like give Josh another thing to like hate me for? Erica is like, he humiliated himself by crying like a goddamn pussy, which I just love her. I think her lines are so funny. So, of course, all over the internet, we've seen this video repeat of Erica introducing herself to Eddie when they are going to play D&D during season 4, where she says, my name is Lady Applejack, and I am a chaotic good half-elf rogue, level 14, and I will sneak behind any monster you throw my way and stab them in the back with my poison-soaked kukri, or in this case, stab them in the back with a syringe filled with drugs. So the scene is insane. They throw blankets and pillows. They put them onto blankets. They carry them out with pillowcases over their heads, which is just wild. And it looks, I don't know, it's almost like haunting or very chilling to watch it. Like that actually gave me more chills than some other stuff. But then they fuck up this house like in a full Home Alone sequence, which I understand this is like what the Duffers were after here. So they cut a hole into the floor. They destroyed like thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars of wine. I know they wanted to do the scene, but it's like if kidnapping wasn't a felony, then like completely trashing this house to this capacity definitely is. I love that Robin has them in the car and she's like, yeah, they're in their food coma, which I thought was really funny. We then have Will apologizing to Joyce and Joyce telling him that she feels so guilty because she didn't know that Will was missing for 8 hours. And, you know, Will is like, I'm really sorry. Like, your plan sucked, but like, I shouldn't have gone about it this way. We should have like had a conversation. And so I really liked this conversation between Joyce and Will. I thought it was really impactful. And then we have Robin asking Steve what kind of lawyer Steve's uncle is, because according to Robin, it seems like a Harrington thing to defend the rich douchebags. And she like makes a point. She's like, where in this case, like the rich douchebags are going to be the ones that are after us. So like, what kind of lawyer is your uncle? The Demogorgon then is in Derek's room. He finds out that it's a dummy. He gets hits with the nails. He sort of whimpers like a dog. And I low-key felt bad for the Demogorgon. I was like, yeah, that looks like it hurt. They then tag it. They light it on fire. They barb wire it, like all of this kind of stuff. Once they set it on fire, after they've put the tracker in it, that's when they get the flip where Mike is like, it flipped. And that's when Dustin and Steve in the car start tracking the Demogorgon. Nancy and Jonathan are with them at this point. The Demogorgon starts going in one direction and then it turns around. It makes like a 180. It starts going the complete opposite direction. And we find out that the Demogorgon does this to pursue Derek, who we discover is awake. And now the Demogorgon is heading to get Derek, who is awake in the cabin. Okay. Then we have Holly in the woods. It says walk up the hill. And all I could think about was the Kate Bush song. Like I was like Kate Bush style, or you know what? She then comes to a canyon. She takes what was Henry Creel's spyglass, which she stole from Henry's room. She didn't steal it because he says, what's mine is yours. And it says Captain Midnight's spy source. So I am wondering if because she is in his mind palace, Henry's mind palace, physically that he can use her to spy on Max. Like this is some sort of Inception level mind consciousness. I'm not really sure. But at the very end of the episode, we get the Max reveal. And that is the end of this episode. That is season 5, episode 3, The Turnbow Trap. So let's crack open our burn book where we will look at the superlatives for this episode. We have first and foremost the Bold and Bothered Award, which is strictly for the Femme and the Furious. And this is the quote or the moment that really relays the most feminine rage. And it goes to Nancy Wheeler, who says, is that a fact or a theory to shut down Murray Bauer? The Shiro Award. This award goes to the baddie who is the most inspiring or the moment that is the most empowering. And this goes to Holly turning into Holly the Heroic. The Femme Fatale Award for the most smash the patriarchy moment of the episode. And this is Elle breaking into the mind of Alpha One, aka Acres. Speak Your Truth trophy, the best line or quote. This goes to Robin, who says, it must be my tone. My mother says I sound perpetually insincere. Just think that's a really funny line. Honorary heartthrob, because I'm just a girl, okay? And I want to talk about the most swoon-worthy moments in every episode. And that would be Robin sharing with Will how she picked up on the signs from Vicky where she says, let's just say that the snowball turned into an avalanche. I just thought that was cute. It was quirky. It was fun. It was very Robin, but I loved it. And then we have Retro Glow, the best 80s nostalgia, and our Boombox Bliss, which is the best needle drop. And I am tagging these together as the I Think We're Alone Now cassette, the Tiffany cassette / the cassette, like little, it's very narrow boombox where you could just stick the cassette in and like hit play. This is both the Retro Glow, like just a cassette in general, the boombox in general, but also the song. I love this song. I Think We're Alone Now by Tiffany. I think it was great. I loved this. I like this episode a lot. I'm looking forward to diving into the next episode, which is the last in this volume 1 drop. We are just mere days away from the volume 2 drop. So thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode of Femme and Furious. I will be back on Friday with an interview with an author named Ren. We are going to be talking about heated rivalry up to this point. So if you have any thoughts, feelings, opinions, which like, again, if you listen to this podcast, I know you do, about heated rivalry, now is the fucking time to send it in because we're talking about it on Friday. Okay? Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of Femme and Furious. Like, share, subscribe, send it to a friend, comment, review, all that good stuff. And until next time, eat your damn pie.